The Labor Department says about 860,000 people filed for unemployment benefits last week. Another 659,000 sought pandemic unemployment assistance, a federal program for self-employed and gig workers. Washington Post economics correspondent Heather Long joins me now to discuss. Hi there, Heather. Good to see you again. So, fewer Americans filed for jobless aid last week. Is that a good sign for the labor market?
It's sort of a small cheer. It's good to see those numbers come down a little bit. They were very high in August. But the key to remember on the labor market is we have recovered half the jobs. There's still a long way to go. It's kind of like running a marathon. We run the first half, but as anybody who's played sports knows, the second half of that marathon or that game is the harder bit. And that's where we are now. Keep in mind also that several major companies, a lot of the airlines, for instance, have warned that they are likely to do layoffs in the coming weeks. So we are still losing quite a few jobs at this point, 6 months into this pandemic and recovery.
So when you look at it on the whole, Heather, how many Americans are receiving some form of unemployment aid at this moment?
What we learned today is that number is almost 30 million. And we've seen that number stay the same for the last 6 or so weeks. It's not moving down much. Now, it should be a very simple question, how many people are receiving these unemployment payments every week? It's actually a little bit complicated. I wouldn't sort of put it in stone that it's 30 million. There's a little bit of a quirk with the data since people are on different types of programs and different states report those slightly differently. But the bottom line is we know that it's close to 30 million, and we know that that number really hasn't come down a lot. And again, if things were truly starting to recover, if we weren't seeing a lot more job losses this far along, we would expect that number to be a lot closer to 20 million than it is right now.
So on Wednesday, Federal Reserve leaders said they think the economy will recover faster than it thought earlier this year. Why is that, and what's your assessment of that?
Yeah, it was. They said several times that so far, particularly in the last 60 days, things have recovered a little bit quicker than expected. But it was kind of a mixed bag, and that's why you saw the stock market jump as the Federal Reserve gave its press conference yesterday. The stock market began to fall because the real picture that they were painting was actually pretty gloomy going forward. That Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell that you're showing right now, he kept stressing that the path ahead remains, quote, highly uncertain. He stressed that several times. It's highly uncertain whether or not things are going to slow down, whether we end up having another dip recession. So if the pandemic comes back, we get a bad flu season, we have to close down some businesses again this winter, that could easily put us into a tailspin. We could even lose some of the gains we are already made. Obviously, no, everyone hopes that doesn't happen, but there's a lot of risk still. The economy is very fragile, was the message yesterday from the Fed. And what I really took away is their projection that the labor market, those critical jobs, would not be back to anything close to pre-pandemic levels until the end of 2023. That's a long time if you're somebody out of work.
I mean, that really is stunning to hear that. And of course, Congress still has not passed another coronavirus aid bill. So how much could that factor into future projections from the Fed?
That's huge. They actually said that their slightly more optimistic projections that they showed this week already bake in that Congress is going to do something. So they're still hopeful that there will be action from Congress of a sort of $1 to $1.5 trillion package in the coming weeks before the election. Right now, a lot of folks I talk to on the Hill and otherwise say it's about a 50-50 chance whether that bill gets done. That's a very uncomfortable place. I was just speaking to a woman yesterday who had her car repossessed. She's been out of work since March. She is in desperate need of that unemployment aid or another $1,200 stimulus check.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to hear these stories. And I want to ask you, Heather, while we've got you here, about your reporting on the alarming number of low-income students dropping out of college this fall. What help do these students need to be able to continue their education?
It's really stunning. We've seen over 100,000 fewer freshmen this year, and most of them are low-income students, particularly Black students and rural white students. What's going on? The main driver is these students do not have good Wi-Fi. Some of them don't have Wi-Fi access or computer access at all at home. They would normally go to a library or to the school's computer, resource center. Those are closed, or they aren't allowing students to sit there and take their 90-minute or however long class. And so that's why we're seeing this huge divide, as we are in so many parts of the economy, between people who can work from home, people who have good Wi-Fi access, and students like these low-income students that we profiled who are having to drop out of classes, who do not have access to Wi-Fi, and are really suffering.
And Heather, how are these situations exacerbating this divide between low-income students and their counterparts whose families have higher incomes?
You can just see it play out. We all know this sad story so well. Students who drop out of college rarely come back. Only 13% usually ever re-enroll, let alone graduate. And that's going to impact their earnings for life. They will have fewer job prospects. They will get paid a lower salary for decades to come. It also impacts the economy as a whole. We're talking about potentially a lost generation of college students this year and maybe next year. Obviously, as a country, we are trying to increase the number of people in our country with college degrees who can do more advanced work. And if we're having a lost generation, that impacts our economic potential going forward as well. So it's a big loss to these students and to the country as a whole.